Hey dear restless mind, tonight. We slip into the cobbled hush of late medieval Germany, stepping through the fog-thick alleys of Nördlingen on a cold spring morning in 1472. The bells of St. Georg's Tower have barely finished echoing when you find yourself pressed against the wind, watching the first signs of a life stir in the city's red light quarter. Smoke drifts lazily from cramped chimneys, mingling with the sharp scent of tallow day-old ale and the damp musk of timber that never seems to dry. Across the street a wagon rumbles past on square wheels, its driver muttering because one of the oxen insists on stopping to inspect every puddle. A pair of apprentices hurry behind him, kicking frost off their boots, pretending they're not sneaking glances toward the brothel door you're standing near. Inside that door is Else von Eystett, a woman whose world you're about to follow step for step. She doesn't know you're here. Nobody can see you after all. But you drift behind her like a shadow as she rises from her straw mattress, brushing dust from her sleeves and blinking sleep from her eyes. For her, this isn't a morning of poetic mist and quaint medieval charm. It's the first churn in a long, regulated and often brutal routine that the city fathers have carefully built around women like her. And because you've chosen this path tonight, well, let's just say, you probably won't survive this century's municipal bureaucracy. The paperwork alone could club a man senseless. Before we march deeper into Else's day, let me gently prod your modern soul with the ritual we do here. If a day in the life of a medieval prostitute pulled you in tonight, tap the like button, whisper a comment, and let me know your location and local time. You stay close behind Els as she swings her feet to the floor, wincing slightly when the chill of the stone reaches her toes. The municipal brothel, owned, regulated and occasionally exploited by the city's own officials, is already stirring. You hear the shuffle of other women in nearby rooms, each one waking into a life she didn't choose, governed by rules written by men who'd never know their hunger, their debts, or their bruises. Else pulls her rough wool skirt into place, murmuring under her breath as she checks whether her only surviving pair of stockings has developed another hole overnight. Spoiler, it has. Medieval life really is one long episode of This Old House, but without the cheerful carpenter to fix anything. The narrow hallway outside her room angles downward toward the kitchen, where a dull fire has been coaxed into reluctant life by a young girl whose job is to get the house warm enough to mask last night's smells. She's stirring a pot of barley mush stiff enough to be considered a building material. At the sight of Els, the girl nods, a tiny greeting, because too much cheer this early is cause for suspicion. You follow Els outside, ducking instinctively as she does to avoid the low lintel. The brothel sits on a street that city leaders have meticulously labelled and marginalised. The women's quarter, known politely as the public house, and less politely as the necessary evil. Church bells toll in the distance, not for the women here, who are barred from attending mass unless the brothel keeper feels unusually generous or needs to impress city officers. The sun is barely a rumour on the horizon. The air tastes of wood smoke and damp earth. A dog trots by carrying something that you choose to believe is a stick and not someone's missing shoe lining. Elle steps into the morning with familiarity and caution. She has learned to read the street before she takes her second breath. Which men are wandering home from taverns, which apprentices are out running errands, which watchmen are pretending not to stare at the brothel door while judging every woman behind it. You trail after her, invisible but attentive. Across the way, the neighbouring cooper's shop is opening. Barrels are stacked like chubby little sentries, and the cooper's son, a freckled boy with a runny nose, is sweeping the doorstep as if trying to erase last night's footprints. He glances at Els, then glances away. Too embarrassed to look at her, too curious not to, you catch Else's inward sigh. This is her daily reality. Everyone sees her. Nobody truly wants to acknowledge her, and yet her existence shapes civic policy, urban planning, and even the church's sermons more than the cooper's entire guild ever will. As she walks, You feel the stiffness of municipal structure around her. City regulations pressed tight like corset stays. Being a prostitute here isn't just a personal misfortune, it's a bureaucratic category. Women working in the municipal brothel pay taxes, follow dress codes, and live under strict rules. They may not wear expensive fabrics. They must live within designated quarters. They must be available for inspections, medical, moral, and otherwise. They must report to the brothel keeper like employees, yet have no rights as such. Else is expected to exist in this narrow corridor between condemnation and utility. The city despises prostitution, but it depends on it. The church condemns the sin, but it tolerates the system. Men call the women immoral, yet rely on their presence to protect respectable wives. And as usual in medieval Europe, the hypocrisy is thick enough to spread on bread. As she walks toward the communal pump to wash, the stones beneath her feet are slick with morning frost. You can smell the metallic cold of it, mixed with the faint sweetness of early spring blossoms from someone's neglected planters. A pair of laundresses are already there, exchanging gossip at a speed that would break the sound barrier if physics allowed it. They glance at Els, whisper something you don't catch, and return to their scrubbing. Elle says nothing, not because she doesn't hear, but because the effort of caring about strangers' judgments ran out a long time ago. She washes quickly, wincing at the icy water. You feel the tightness in her movements, the way she checks over her shoulder, the way she keeps her back toward the pump's post so she has something solid behind her. Safety, here, is a strategic geometry. Nearby, a city officer strides by, the kind whose hat announces, "I absolutely abuse my authority." He gives Els a curt nod, half greeting, half inspection. She gives a shallow nod back. You realize this is part of the daily script, supervised civility. He doesn't smile. She doesn't speak. It is enough. Inside the brothel again, you trail her as she moves through morning chores. The municipal brothel isn't merely a business. It's a controlled environment designed to keep women indebted, dependent, and surveyed. The keeper, Lionheart Freyamat, whose name conveniently sounds like a villain in a dubious opera, runs the place with his partner, Barbara. The pair hold power not only because the city lets them, but because every woman here owes them money for food, lodging, clothing, and the absurd fees the house invents whenever debt levels threaten to fall too low. Els carries a bucket toward the kitchen, checks on the fire, and begins slicing stale bread for the household's meagre breakfast. The knife she uses is dull enough to qualify as a spoon. She works without complaint, because complain too loudly, and Barbara will remind her that rules in this place are enforced physically, not through polite memos. As Els moves through her tasks, you sense the weight of the morning settling on her. She hasn't yet reached the hardest parts of her day. Those come later, when the brothel opens its doors and the business side of her life begins in earnest. But even these quiet hours bear tension. In a corner, another woman is mending a torn shift with fingers so cold she keeps missing the thread. A third is coughing, a rattling, congested sound that medieval physicians would diagnose as excess of cold humours, which is physician speak for, "We have no idea, please try not to die until after supper." Despite everything, a few jokes slip into the morning air. Medieval humour is 70% bodily functions and 30% making fun of the mayor's haircut, so you feel right at home. Elle snorts softly at one woman's impersonation of a drunk client who claimed to be a knight, but couldn't remember which horse was his. For a moment the room lightens. Then the keeper's footsteps echo down the hall and silence settles like frost. Elle stiffens. So do you instinctively. Lionheart makes his rounds, eyes sweeping the common area, checking whether the women are ready for the day, which is code for presentable enough for the city inspectors who sometimes arrive unannounced. His expression is carved from the same material as tax collectors' souls. He notes Else's progress with a grunt, not of approval but of accounting. She owes him money. Everything about her morning reflects that. As he leaves, Els exhales just a little, not relief, but survival. You follow her as she continues preparing, tightening her belt, smoothing her sleeves, checking that she hasn't broken any of the tiny invisible rules that keep her from being fined or punished. Her entire morning is a choreography around the expectations of others. Stepping back outside, Els glances toward the marketplace where vendors are setting up. The smell of onions and frying lard drifts through the cool air, carrying the promise of food she won't be allowed to buy without permission. A pair of clerics walk past, talking loudly about virtue. One looks away when he sees Els, the other stares a moment too long, the exact ratio the medieval church specialised in. You stay close behind Els as the morning thaws into that grey. Workman-like sunshine medieval towns seem to specialise in, the kind that promises warmth, but mostly offers the illusion of it. Nördlingen's streets swell with noise, vendors shouting prices that change depending on who's listening, geese protesting their own existence, apprentices tripping over each other as if their shoes have staged a rebellion. The city is awake now, and with it comes the network of rules, officials, and authority figures who shape every minute of Elsa's day. She adjusts the laces on her bodice, not out of vanity, but because the municipal officers will comment, loudly and unhelpfully, if any woman in the public house looks slovenly. The irony is rich considering these men haven't washed their cloaks since the saint whose name they bear was alive. You follow Els toward the brothel's front chamber, where a table has been dragged out to create a makeshift checkpoint. This is not the charming kind of checkpoint with smiling workers and decorative baskets of turnips. This is the kind where documents are checked, taxes are collected, and the local clerk ensures every woman knows her place in the social hierarchy. The clerk arrives moments later. His boots slap the floor with the rhythm of a man who enjoys paperwork a little too much. You can almost see the ink stains on his fingers glowing with bureaucratic joy. He sets down a leather-bound ledger so heavy it could double as a melee weapon. Els steps forward with practiced caution. The clerk flips pages, scanning for her name. Els von Eystett, he mutters, tapping the page with a quill that has been sharpened more often than his manners. Debts. Still owed. Municipal fees. Outstanding. Ward dues. Payable by next month. Confirmation of residency. Required. It's astonishing how one man with one book can make your soul feel as if it owes interest. Els nods. She doesn't argue. Everyone knows arguing with a clerk only makes your debt mysteriously grow, like a medieval version of dynamic pricing. The clerk marks a few lines, grumbles something about the mayor's reforms that nobody wants, and stamps the page with a seal that smells faintly of hot beeswax. When he dismisses her with a flick of his quill, Els exhales. You do too. Congratulations. You have successfully navigated municipal oversight, which by medieval standards is more dangerous than sword play. But today's bureaucratic gauntlet isn't finished. 2 city officers arrive next, clad in padded jerkins and expressions that suggest they were born frowning. Their job is to inspect the brothel, not for safety, not for dignity, not for humane conditions, but to ensure compliance with regulations that mostly exist to protect the city from scandal. They enter with the stiff posture of men who want everyone to know they're important. One of them, the younger, has a moustache so proud it could run for office. Their inspection begins in the common room. You and Els trail behind them at a polite distance. A necessary tactic because men like these believe proximity equals permission to lecture. The older officer picks up a discarded shift from a bench and lifts it as though he's holding a cursed relic. "This shouldn't be here," he says. Barbara, the brothel keeper's partner, hurries forward with the smile of someone hoping to avoid fines. "Oh, that officer is simply awaiting mending." "It looks unsightly," the officer insists. You resist the urge to remind him that unsightly is the default aesthetic of the entire century. The men continue through the hall, taking stock of bed linens, wall hangings, and even the placement of stools. One stool is too close to a support beam. Apparently that's a risk factor for sin. You file that away under medieval safety theories, right next to "don't bathe or your soul might dissolve." Else keeps her distance, but she watches the officers carefully. Everyone here has learned the same rule. Officials can be more unpredictable than the clients. After 30 minutes of pointing at meaningless details, the officers turn to the women. "Attendants?" the mustache officer asks. Barbara announces the names one by one, and each woman steps forward to show her face. This isn't to learn their identities. Everyone already knows them. It's to confirm they haven't fled, died, or done anything inconvenient like obtaining personal freedom. Elle steps forward when her name is called. The officer squints at her as though her expression might be hiding treason. When he nods, it's not approval. It's simply acknowledgement that she remains in the system. Next comes the clothing inspection. Each woman must prove she's wearing appropriate garments, meaning garments that clearly mark her as a prostitute. The city doesn't want any confusion between respectable woman and necessary evil. Such boundaries keep the social order structured, or so the men with quills and seals insist. Else demonstrates her woolen skirt and plain apron. Nothing red, nothing luxurious, nothing with decorative embroidery. All of those things are forbidden to women like her. Forbidden not because fabric has moral value, but because the city needs to maintain visible hierarchy. Heaven forbid a sinner looks stylish. The officers nod and move on. The inspection continues into the kitchen, where the fire has finally taken on a lively crackle. They poke their heads into storerooms, sniff barrels of ale, check the locks on the back door to ensure no unsanctioned movement occurs. At last, satisfied with their morning display of authority, they leave with the warning, "We may return unannounced," which everyone knows is code for, "We will return when it is least convenient." The moment they're gone, the atmosphere loosens. Shoulders drop. Conversations resume. You feel the tension unwind like a tightened rope finally allowed to slack. Elle steps toward the doorway, peering out into the street. Midday is approaching, and with it a different kind of scrutiny. Guild members begin walking past on their way to lunch. Carpenters, tanners, coopers, men who spend their days doing honest labour but spend their evenings pretending not to recognise the women here. A few glance into the brothel's entryway before quickly looking away as though curiosity might summon a sermon. A pair of clerics wander by next, debating theological nuance with the intensity of men who have never had to gut a fish or scrub laundry. One quotes St. Jerome with theatrical disdain, condemning women like Els while stepping around horse droppings with equal disgust. Els watches them go with a deep, steadying breath. You sense her calculation. How many rules will intersect her day? How many watchful eyes will shape her afternoon? The clergy, the officers, the brothel keepers, the city council, an entire hierarchy built to contain her. Back inside, a new inspection begins, this one led by Barbara, but motivated by fear of Lionheart. She counts linens, reviews the women's debt logs, and checks meal portions. Each woman owes money for food that barely qualifies as edible. The bread is yesterday's, the porridge is thin, and the wine tastes like it lost a bet. But the prices rise anyway. Debt is the weapon that keeps the women here. Else waits her turn, her expression neutral. You notice she has mastered the art of quiet compliance, a skill as necessary as any craft. When Barbara reaches her, Else presents her balance sheet. Barbara examines it, nods, and marks the total with a charcoal stub. Debt confirmed. Control maintained. By the time Else returns to her room, the sun is highest in the sky. It slants through the narrow window, drawing a pale rectangle across the floorboards. She sits at the edge of her bed, rubbing her hands together as if grounding herself. This is the middle of her day. A pause before the next wave of expectations. She's dealt with guild members glancing past her, clergy condemning her, and officers regulating the very air she breathes. And none of it has yet touched the core work she will be forced to do this afternoon. You realise something important about Else's world. Her actions are governed not by one authority, but by many overlapping ones, secular, religious, economic and domestic. Every step she takes is monitored, every debt is recorded, every rule is enforced by someone whose power outweighs hers, and still she rises each morning. Still, she navigates the narrow paths available to her. Still, she fights for small moments of dignity, a mended stocking, a warm corner of the kitchen, a shared joke before the keeper walks in. You watch her breathe slowly, preparing for the next chapter of the day, and you prepare with her. You remain close behind Else as midday slips into the long stretch of afternoon. That part of the day when the sun hangs uncomfortably bright over Nördlingen, and every sound seems sharper, as though the town itself is bracing for something. The noise of the marketplace filters into the brothel through warped shutters, vendors shouting prices, pigs protesting their own existence, the repetitive clank of a blacksmith who hammers with the enthusiasm of someone taking revenge on metal. Inside the brothel, however, the air grows quieter and more tense, the sort of tension that swells before a storm. This is the time when the routine shifts from chores and inspections into something far more precarious. The hours when Els and the other women begin to navigate the unpredictable realities of client management, safety, ground rules, and the invisible calculations required to stay alive in a system that gives them very few choices. Els moves through the common room, checking the stools, straightening a corner of the rug, and pushing open the windows just enough to let in a breath of outside air without allowing too much of the brothel's interior to be seen. Everything she does is deliberate. A misplaced stool can lead to a scolding from the keeper. Too much sunlight can invite the kind of glances from passing men that promise trouble. Too little sunlight makes the room feel like a cave, and caves invite secrets, and secrets invite punishments. She is careful, not because she is timid, but because she understands that survival here is partly about mastering the quiet mathematics of risk. You follow her into the hallway where two of the younger women, both barely older than apprentices in town, whisper by the doorway. They're giggling, but the sound is brittle, nervous. Their laughter is the medieval equivalent of tapping your foot while waiting for exam results. Els gives them a small smile, not indulgent, not dismissive, but the kind of smile you give when you've stood exactly where they stand and know the path ahead is not one you would ever choose to walk again. One of the girls asks Els whether the keeper is in a temper today. Ellis shakes her head gently. "Not yet," she murmurs, "but stay sharp." You feel the weight of those two words. Not yet. When the brothel door opens with a creak that could wake the dead, you notice every woman's posture shift. Clients do not enter like normal visitors. They step in with the swagger of men who believe the space belongs to them, because the entire social order has taught them exactly that. The first man to enter is a journeyman tanner, his leather apron stiff with work and his hands stained a deep brown from tannins. He glances around with the alertness of a man who wants to appear casual but is secretly checking whether anyone important might see him. When he spots Els, he nods to her, a cordial gesture tinged with awkwardness. She acknowledges him politely but keeps her distance. The first line of defence. You notice how Els observes everything. She watches his walk, his expression, whether he seems drunk or sober, whether he carries anger in his shoulders or sadness in his eyes. She reads men the way scholars read manuscripts. A client may claim one intention at the door and reveal a very different one upstairs. A safe-looking man might turn violent. A timid man might become desperate. A jovial man might decide that boundaries are optional. For Els, safety is not about muscle or weapons. It is about reading patterns, predicting moods, and knowing when to accept a man and when to redirect him to another woman who feels up to handling his particular temperament. The tanner speaks quietly with the keeper, and the keeper, eager for profit, and gestures toward Els. She stays still, not stepping forward, waiting to see what the man wants. He picks her, politely but decisively, and Els nods. In that nod is an entire negotiation. She will accept him only after she gauges his tone, ensures he is sober, and confirms he is not bringing danger into her small, precarious world. Clients think they do the choosing. but women like Els have learned to protect themselves by guiding the choice from the shadows. She leads him to a corner of the room where she can ask the usual questions in a low voice. Are you sober? Are you calm? Are you respectful of rules? Her questions are framed gently, but each one is a boundary staked in survival. As the afternoon stretches on, more men arrive. A pair of merchants from Augsburg enter with the self-satisfied look of men who talk too loudly about trade guilds. One leans on the counter as though he owns the place. The other nervously adjusts his belt, clearly hoping someone from his parish won't wander past the open door. You can sense Els assessing them, one too loud, one too anxious. Both bring the risk of gossip, which brings the risk of the council getting involved, which brings the risk of punishment. She avoids them without seeming to avoid them, drifting to another room, starting a conversation with a different woman, taking up a task that makes her look unavailable. Her movements are subtle, intentional, protective. In a quiet corner of the brothel, Els meets one of the older women, Gertrude, who has worked here longer than most people in the city have been alive. Gertrude's laugh is low and warm, and she calls Els child, despite Els not being much younger than she is. As you linger near them, you realise how much women here rely on one another. The bond is not romanticised, it is practical, forged from shared danger. They share knowledge, which clients are safe, which ones to avoid, which ones drink too heavily, which ones pay reliably, which ones whisper things that shouldn't be repeated. They share food when one of them eats too little. They share clothing when someone's garments have worn thin. They share warnings about illnesses, injuries, the keeper's moods, and rumours that could change everything. Gertrude pulls Els aside briefly. She murmurs that the keeper seems agitated today, muttering about unpaid rents and overdue fees. Els nods. She knows exactly what this means. When Lionheart feels anxious about money, he grows harsher. You remember Barbara's ledger from earlier. The brothel's entire economy rests on keeping the women perpetually indebted. The system thrives on scarcity. If a woman somehow earns too much, her room rent mysteriously increases. If she buys new shoes, her meal fees rise. If she receives a gift from a client, the value is deducted as a house tax. It is a cycle designed to be unbroken. A sudden noise interrupts the room, a loud thump from upstairs, followed by a muffled shout. Els glances toward the staircase, not fearful, but alert. A younger woman descends the steps a moment later, her face pale but her jaw clenched. She mutters to Els that a client grew aggressive, demanding something she refused to do. Els immediately pulls her aside, checking if she's hurt, guiding her to the small bench near the fire. Gertrude brings water. Another woman brings a cloth. You watch the quick, efficient care, the way they rally around one another without needing instructions. When the keeper bursts into the room demanding to know what happened, Els stands up. Her voice remains level, respectful but firm, explaining that the client was drunk, unreasonable, and refused to heed the woman's boundaries. Lionheart grumbles that the woman should know how to handle men, but Els doesn't flinch. She reiterates, softly but decisively, that allowing violent clients risks attracting the city guards, and that would harm the brothel's reputation and its income. It is a strategic argument, one that appeals to the keeper's greed rather than his non-existent empathy, and it works. Lionheart softens his tone, muttering something about removing troublesome customers. You watch Els diffuse danger using nothing but precision and calm. It's a skill sharpened by survival. As afternoon deepens into the slow, heavy golden light of early evening, the brothel's energy shifts again. The earlier flow of labourers gives way to clerks, apprentices, and merchants who sneak in under the excuse of running errands. Some of them speak to Els politely, others with forced charm, and still others with an overeager friendliness that feels like desperation wrapped in cologne. Els knows how to respond to each type, deflecting overly talkative men, calming nervous ones, and avoiding those who carry an air of entitlement or instability. One young man, barely old enough to grow a beard, enters with trembling hands. He seems terrified, overwhelmed by guilt, shame, and curiosity. Els guides him gently, ensuring he doesn't make a fool of himself in front of the keeper. She speaks to him softly, explaining boundaries, asking calm questions, keeping him grounded. You realise this is part of her work too, not the part the city acknowledges or the church tolerates, but the part that requires empathy, patience, and emotional labour that no one pays her for. Throughout the afternoon, Els remains a steady presence, not passive, not resigned, but watchful and intentional. She manoeuvres through every interaction with a blend of caution and intuition. She shields the younger women from dangerous men. She redirects clients who might cause trouble. She negotiates with the keeper in low tones to prevent unfair punishments. She observes the brothel's rhythms the way a sailor observes tides, knowing when to move, when to wait, and when to brace for a storm. By the time the sun lowers toward the horizon, filling the brothel with long orange shadows that stretch across the floorboards, Els has navigated dozens of small hazards: aggressive clients, whispered rumours, shifting rules, uneven moods. She has brokered peace, negotiated safety, and shared quiet moments of solidarity with the other women. You sense her preparing for what lies ahead. The evening will bring its own pressures, its own dangers, its own challenges, financial, physical, emotional. But for now she allows herself a moment to rest her hands in her lap, breathing slowly as she gazes at the fading light. You stand beside her, invisible, a witness to the strength she doesn't name and the endurance she doesn't flaunt. She simply exists steadily in a world that pushes her from all sides. The sun dips lower over Nördlingen, turning the timbered walls of the brothel a soft orange and filling the narrow lanes outside with long, uneven shadows that look like they're trying to stretch themselves out of the medieval era altogether. Evening is when the city exhales after a day of labour, but inside the brothel the air tightens. You stay close behind Els as she finishes a task she began hours ago, wiping down the rough wooden table in the common room with a cloth so frayed it could legally apply for retirement. The room smells faintly of ale, smoke, and the perfume of crushed herbs someone tried to burn earlier in a noble but failed attempt to freshen the place. Now that daylight is dying, the space begins shifting into its nighttime role, a transformation that always unsettles you, not because of explicit acts, you're not witnessing any of that, but because the atmosphere itself thickens with the tension of what might happen, what the women endure and what the city insists on ignoring. Els pauses for a moment, leaning her hands against the table as if grounding herself. Evening is the hardest part of the day for women like her, and not only for the reasons people might imagine. The dangers are multiplied after dusk. Clients grow bolder with drink, debts get tallied, illness becomes harder to ignore, food supplies run thin, and the brothel keepers tighten their control. Everything becomes sharper edged. Everything requires more vigilance. Even the whispers of the brothel seem to deepen, like the building itself is bracing. You follow Els toward the kitchen, where the women gather to prepare their evening meal. The pot on the fire contains a stew whose ingredients are difficult to identify. Roots, onions, a bit of grain, and something that might once have been meat but now floats with the exhausted expression of someone who regrets its life choices. The scent is not pleasant, but it is warm, and warmth counts for a great deal in a world where hunger is one of the brothel's most reliable methods of control. Els ladles portions into small wooden bowls, careful to divide everything equally, though the keeper insists on taking the first portion for himself, arguing it is quality control. You note that this quality control always results in the keeper getting the best chunks, leaving the women with broth that looks like medieval sadness distilled into liquid form. As Els carries her bowl to a bench, she checks on one of the younger women, who has spent the afternoon nursing a headache so severe she keeps one eye closed to ease the pounding. The girl insists she's fine, but Els presses a palm to her forehead and frowns. Too much heat, she murmurs, and too little rest. You remember what medieval physicians believe about headaches, that they're caused by vapours rising from the stomach, or demons, or an imbalance of black bile, depending on which physician got more sleep. The real cause here is exhaustion, stress, poor nutrition, and probably dehydration, but Els can only treat what she knows: a cool cloth, a quiet corner, and a bit of whispered comfort. You watch the girl relax slightly beneath her touch, grateful for even this small mercy. As they eat, the women talk about the ailments that plague the brothel. One complains about aching joints, which the town's barber surgeon would chalk up to too much cold humoral influence. Another mentions a rash on her arms, which someone suggests treating with a poultice of boiled nettles, a cure that sounds like a punishment disguised as medicine. Disease moves silently in places like this, passing through close quarters, shared blankets, and unwashed hands, and always, over all of it, looms the shadow of something far more dangerous. The diseases passed by clients, the ones the city refuses to acknowledge publicly but whispers about in private, each whisper soaked in shame and misinformation. Els listens as one woman describes a client who came in with sores on his lips and refused to take no for an answer. She told him to leave, but he threatened to report her to the keeper for refusing service. The women around the fire exchange glances heavy with unspoken fear. They all know the signs: lesions, fevers, rashes, fatigue. And they know the church's explanations: divine punishment for sin, corruption of the soul, impurity manifesting in the flesh. But the women's experience tells another story entirely. They know disease doesn't care about morality. They know sickness comes from contact, from bodily fluids, from exposure. They know the church's condemnations do nothing to protect them. The brothel, for all its dangers, functions as a hub of information about illness. Women share what they've seen. They warn each other. They compare symptoms. They pass along home remedies that might ease pain even if they can't cure anything. Els has heard everything, from rubbing mercury on sores, a cure that often kills faster than the disease, to applying leeches in places no leech should have to experience. The medieval medical world is a dizzying mix of superstition and desperation, and yet women like Els navigate it daily, using whatever scraps of knowledge they have to stay alive. After the meal, Els steps outside for a moment of fresh air. You follow her into the cool dusk, the sky streaked with purple and gold. She leans against the wooden doorframe, watching the street as people pass. Merchants heading home, young boys chasing each other with sticks, a washerwoman hauling a basket almost as large as she is. The city feels almost peaceful from this vantage point. If you didn't know better, you might imagine this was a normal life in a normal place. But Elsa's eyes tell the truth. She sees the people who won't look at her, the people who whisper as they pass, the men who pretend not to recognize her outside the brothel, the women who blame her for the moral failings of their husbands. She absorbs their judgment quietly, not because she accepts it, but because fighting a city's worth of hypocrisy would drain energy she needs simply to endure. A group of clerics walks by, speaking loudly about sin, as if ensuring everyone hears their virtue. One of them glances directly at Els, then immediately looks away, his expression tightening. You recognize the pattern. Disapproval laced with curiosity, curiosity laced with fear, fear laced with the suspicion that the world is not as moral as he's been told. Another cleric mutters something about Eve's temptation in the garden, a passage they use frequently to justify their disdain for women like Els. The blame for sin, in their eyes, always traces back to women, never to the men who perpetuate the system. As the clerics move out of earshot, Els lets out a long breath. She is used to these judgments, but that doesn't make them weightless. You sense the heaviness sitting in her chest, but also the iron beneath it. She has endured worse than glances. When she returns inside, the brothel's hallway is dim, lit by a single lantern that does little to chase away the shadows. The air feels thicker now, carrying the weight of evening obligations. The keeper Lionheart appears from his private room counting coins in a small pouch. His face pinches with displeasure. He lectures Barbara in a low, angry tone about revenue, markets, the city's tax demands, and the women not earning fast enough. Barbara, accustomed to these tirades, nods while adjusting her apron with quick, nervous fingers. Els watches from a distance. She recognizes the signs, a night when Lionheart's temper may tip toward cruelty. She stays calm, composed, ready to intervene if needed, ready to diffuse tension among the women before the keeper's frustration spills over into punishment. Debt controls the women, but mood controls the night. Barbara approaches Els, holding the ledger. She lists off the day's expenses, the outstanding balances, the supplies that need replacing, all of which will be charged to the women. Els listens quietly. The numbers climb, debt deepens, the system reinforces itself. None of this is surprising. She thanks Barbara for the information, even though thanking someone for debt feels absurdly polite. A knock sounds at the brothel door. Not the hesitant knock of a nervous client, nor the pounding fist of someone drunk. This is firm, official. Els stiffens. You feel the air tighten again. Barbara opens the door to reveal two city guards, their helmets catching the lantern light. They announce they're conducting a routine evening visit, which in municipal language means, "We heard a rumour and want to make sure nothing scandalous might embarrass the council." The guards step inside, observing the room with the same suspicion they reserve for tax evaders and over-enthusiastic jugglers. Els stands still and lets them look, knowing she has done nothing wrong. But wrongness here is not defined by actions. It is defined by the mood of the authorities. She holds her breath as they wander through the common room, peering into corners as though mischief might sprout spontaneously like mould. Eventually satisfied with their performance of authority, they nod curtly and leave. When the door closes, the tension disperses. The women resume their tasks. The keeper disappears to sulk in his room. Barbara rushes to prepare for the next wave of clients, and Els walks down the hall toward her room, her steps slow and thoughtful. Inside her small chamber, she sinks onto the edge of her bed. You sit beside her, or rather stand, invisible, a silent companion. She rubs her temples with tired fingers, the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from physical labour alone but from constant alertness, endless vigilance, and the emotional weight of living in a world shaped entirely around judgments and double standards. You watch her breathe, her shoulders rising and falling as she prepares for the night ahead. Despite everything, the danger, the stigma, the debt, the moral scolding, the illness all around her, she has made it through another day's battles. She has helped the younger women, navigated bureaucrats and guards, managed difficult clients, and protected herself with the skill of someone who has learned to read human nature in its most unvarnished form. In this quiet moment, you see her strength more clearly than ever. It's not loud or dramatic. It's the strength of endurance, of navigating a world that wasn't built for her survival and finding ways to carve out humanity in spite of it. The evening deepens. The brothel grows quieter. Els closes her eyes for a moment, a brief, necessary pause, before she rises to face whatever comes next. Night settles over Nördlingen with the unhurried heaviness of a wool blanket, the kind woven for winter but dragged out far too early in the season. The sky turns a deep contemplative indigo, and the lanterns along the street flare to life one by one, casting shaky halos of gold across the uneven cobblestones. You follow Els as she steps into this dim borderland between evening and true night, moving with the cautious familiarity of someone who knows exactly how treacherous these hours can become. Her shoulders stiffen as the brothel's door thuds shut behind her. The rules of the day remain in place, but an entirely different set overlays them now. Curfews, expectations, watchfulness, and the endless calculations of how to stay safe under the watch of the keeper's temper and the city's gaze. Inside, the brothel feels tighter, Not physically, though the building's cramped, but emotionally, as though the walls themselves are listening. The other women drift about the main room, some pacing, some sitting close to the fireplace, others sewing or mending garments that should have been replaced long ago. Their movements carry an undercurrent of tired tension. After a full day, no one is energized. Everyone understands that night demands a new layer of endurance. Els takes a seat beside Gertrude, who is threading a needle by lantern light, her eyes narrowed with the stubborn determination of someone unwilling to let age dictate the limits of her usefulness. She greets Els with a tired smile and pats the bench. You sit or hover nearby, grateful for the moment of relative calm. Gertrude confides that she overheard Lionheart arguing with Barbara earlier, the kind of argument that simmers rather than explodes. Rumour has it that the council's recent murmurs of investigation have him on edge. If too much scandal surfaces, the city might revoke his licence to run the brothel, and for him that would mean financial ruin. For the women, it would mean displacement at best and punishment at worst. Els listens thoughtfully, nodding. She knows there are only two ways things usually end for the women in municipal brothels. They leave with nothing but the clothes on their back, or they leave in a coffin. The investigation that began with Els's own tragedy could be either their salvation or their destruction. A knock at the door interrupts the murmurs. Els rises lightly, instinctively protective of the younger women, and moves toward the front of the brothel alongside Barbara. The door opens to reveal a figure who is immediately familiar. Margaret von Bibrach, a fellow prostitute who was sent to another brothel weeks ago under suspicious circumstances. She slips inside quickly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one has followed her. Her face is pale, her breathing fast, and her cloak soaked through from an earlier rain. When she sees Els, relief floods her expression. Els guides her toward the hearth, where the warmth begins to thaw her trembling hands. You watch the two women exchange a glance that communicates more than words. Margaret quietly recounts what she has learned. The council's investigation includes not only the alleged abortion, but also the general mistreatment of the women. She reveals that the officers have begun questioning former clients, neighbours, and anyone who may have witnessed violence or coercion. They're compiling a list of grievances, and it grows longer every day. Els absorbs this news with a mix of hope and caution. Justice in medieval Europe is unpredictable. The council may choose to punish the guilty, or they may choose to bury the truth to preserve the town's reputation. Lionheart soon stomps into the room, clearly unhappy with the unexpected visitor. He demands an explanation in a tone that is more threat than inquiry. Before Barbara can stammer out an answer, Els steps forward, not aggressively, but with the quiet confidence she's earned through surviving his rule for so long. She explains that Margaret is here under the council's orders, that she must give a statement in the morning, and that interfering could make things worse for the brothel. Lionheart's eyes narrow, his jaw clenches, but he recognises that Els is not acting out of rebellion. She's making an argument that protects the brothel's fragile legal status. He grumbles, stalks away, and slams his door with force. The women exhale. So do you. As the night deepens, the atmosphere becomes heavier, almost claustrophobic. Els helps Margaret settle into her old room, ensuring she has a blanket and a small cup of warm wine. She lingers at the door a moment, watching her friend drift into an uneasy sleep. Then she returns to the common room where several younger women gather round her. They ask questions, whispered fears about the investigation, about potential escape, about whether the council will listen to their testimony. Els answers gently, truthfully. She offers no false comfort but reminds them that silence has never protected them. Speaking out might. The keeper's presence looms still, but he does not reappear. Barbara moves about the room without her usual sharpness. She too seems frayed by the weight of the investigation. Tonight she is not the enforcer, but the accomplice, and the consequences for her may be as dire as they are for Lionheart. Els takes the opportunity to gather the women discreetly. You stand among them as she speaks in a low voice, outlining what they must expect tomorrow. She encourages them to tell the truth about the beatings, the forced labour, the debt traps, the starvation, the abuses. She does not tell them what to say, but she reminds them that their testimonies matter. For the first time, perhaps ever, a door has opened. Small, narrow, dangerous, but open. The room grows quiet as each woman contemplates the possibility of freedom, or, at the very least, change. You watch the flicker of hope in their eyes. You also see the fear, the uncertainty, the exhaustion of living under conditions that were never meant to leave room for hope. Els remains steady, her voice patient, her presence grounding. Later, after the women disperse to their rooms, Els heads to her own chamber. The lantern burns low, casting a soft, wavering glow across the floorboards. She sits on her bed, elbows resting on her knees, staring at the small wooden box that holds her few belongings, a scrap of cloth from her mother's dress, a tiny wooden cross carved by a travelling merchant long ago, and a ribbon she saved from a happier time. She touches each item lightly, as if reminding herself that she is more than what the brothel has made her. You sense her thoughts drifting toward the future, a dangerous place to look too long. In medieval life, the future is uncertain for everyone, but especially for women like her. Still, tomorrow will bring her testimony. It will bring Margaret's. It will bring truth that has simmered beneath the brothel walls for years. And perhaps, just perhaps, it will bring consequences for those who have harmed her. Els lies back slowly, letting her body sink into the thin mattress. The sounds of the brothel soften as the night deepens. Somewhere downstairs, a door creaks. A horse snorts outside. Rain begins to patter lightly against the roof, the kind of rain that makes the whole world feel as if it is whispering itself to sleep. You imagine the council chambers where Els will speak, the stern faces, the parchment, the ink, the gravity of her words, and you know, even without seeing the future, that what she says will matter. Her testimony will join that of other women, weaving into a story the city cannot ignore. For now, though, she lets herself drift. Her breathing slows, the tension in her shoulders unwinds, and you, her unseen companion, sit quietly at her side, grateful to witness this rare moment of peace after a day filled with fear, courage, and the quiet determination to survive. She closes her eyes, and the night finally lets her rest. Let the world soften now. Let the rough edges of Nördlingen fade into the gentle dimness of memory, and let the lantern glow from Elsa's small room become a warm, steady flicker at the edge of your thoughts. You've followed her through a day shaped by rules, danger, whispered alliances, and the unyielding weight of survival. But now, all of that begins to loosen. The brothel grows quiet, the hallway still, the murmurs of fear and strength dissolving into the low hum of night settling into its deepest hours. Feel the pace slow. Let your breathing match the rhythm of the soft rain tapping against the brothel's roof, a sound that washes the day clean in gentle strokes. The earth outside drinks in the water with a sigh, and even the cobblestones seem to rest under its quiet blessing. In the small room where Els lies, the lantern light dances softly against wooden beams, shifting like the last thoughts of someone drifting towards sleep. And you, still beside her in the shadows, allow yourself to unwind. The tension of the day, the inspections, the danger, the whispered testimonies, loosens its grip on your shoulders. Your mind steps back from the story, easing into the safety of distance, knowing you do not carry her burdens, only her memory, her courage, her resilience. The air grows warmer, thicker, calmer. Each inhale brings softness. Each exhale lets the noise of history fade into a hush. As the rain continues its steady lullaby, you feel your own thoughts slowing, your body sinking gently into whichever surface holds you. Let the quiet of medieval night wrap around you, unhurried and gentle. Let your eyes grow heavy, your breath steady, and your heart settle into calm. The journey rests here now.